Christine and I bought our kids a kitchen set. But I know, weird, we have boys, they should be playing with monster trucks, right? But more on that later. The thing was, I have been procrastinating and building this thing for months, but by the grace of God, last week my parents visited. My dad is really handy, so I asked him, Dad, can you build this for me? And he's like, easy, I build real kitchens. A toy is nothing. So he proceeds to spend 12 hours building this thing. I don't know why it's so complex, but by the end of 12 hours, we have this. Yay, let's go. The moment Christine and I tried to lift it up to move it, we had this. We had this. And my dad saw it, and he's like, yeah, there were a lot of screws and parts left over after. And I'm like, didn't you use the instruction manual? I saw you open it, and he's like, oh, well, I opened it. There's so many pages and pictures that I just decided, forget it. It's too complicated. I'll just do it myself. And so he didn't use the instruction manual. And I thought to myself, if the instructions were complicated, how much more complicated would the reality of the project be, right? But it's all good now. He spent another 3 hours, only 3 hours, with the manual, put it together. It doesn't fall apart when we lift it. The kids love it, and now I have a story for the sermon. Everything is good. I bring up the story because this is just dad stuff, right? We hate instruction manuals. They're terrible, and they're long. And when you say to someone, I didn't use the manual, there's a sense of I beat this piece of furniture, right? It's not smarter than me. But every Christian has something like an instruction manual. Something like an instruction manual. But it's 2,000 years old. It's over 1,000 pages. It's written to an ancient people in a different language, and it's hard to understand. So it's very tempting to just be forget it. It's too complicated. I'll just do it myself. It's the Bible. Okay, it gives us instructions for a good life under the rule and reign and love of God. But it has a lot of rules. And no one likes rules. So for example, something very wrong with my soul here, but if I was about to reach for an apple to eat, and my mom was like, yeah, Tim, eat an apple once a day, I won't eat it. I'll just be screw that, okay? I hate rules, okay? But what if God gave us rules because he knew what he was doing? Imagine with me, okay? Let's say God isn't just powerful and divine and all that stuff. What if he was also smart? Whoa, God is smart, right? Smarter than any business person, smarter than any scientist or influencer, smarter than Andrew Huberman or Elon Musk or whoever else you look up to. Would we dismiss his rules and his words as fast as we do if we considered he was smart? What if, instead of being a list of restrictions meant to oppress us, Jesus' way of life and God's rules for living with him and with others was meant to give us the best chance at life, okay? What if? Let's explore that today. The question is, how can God's rules lead us to abundant life? When we honor the intent of God's rules, because 1, rules used wrongly are weapons, but 2, rules used rightly are gifts. We get this idea from our Bible passage in Mark chapter 2, verse 23 to chapter 3, verse 6. Let's read. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" He answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, 'The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath.'" Another time, Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. So they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." Imagine how embarrassing, the thing you're ashamed of, shown to everyone, okay? Then Jesus asked him, or them, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they remained silent. Of course they would. They can't say, to do evil, right? He looked around at them in anger and, deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. Whoa. Okay, crazy story. Two stories, actually. Most of our focus would be on the first story, but I just wanted to give you a bigger picture of what was going on, okay? Let's start with the first point. Rules used wrongly are weapons. So this argument with Jesus starts with the Sabbath. Okay, the disciples were hungry and they started to pick grain, and grain kind of has this outer cover called the husk. They kind of have to rub off, and then they did that, they ate it, and the Pharisees, who were like the religious elite at the time, pointed at them and said, "Hey, you're breaking the Sabbath. You're breaking the fourth commandment." And we read this nowadays and we're like, what? What's the issue even, right? But to understand what's happening, there's background information we actually have to understand. So at the time, the Jewish people have been exiled and invaded and occupied for hundreds of years. And their understanding of why this had happened was because they had been unfaithful and unloyal to God. Okay? So in attempts to undo this, to be faithful again, they really tried to follow his rules. And of all the rules, they saw two as really, really important to being holy, set apart, distinct, faithful to God, right? Distinct from the other nations. The first was circumcision, which is cutting off the foreskin of the penis. Graphic, I know, sorry, it's okay. The second is the Sabbath, defined in Exodus 20:10 as not doing work on the seventh day. So they believed that if they kept these rules, God would see their faithfulness and their nation would be blessed. So let's just go through these two, okay? The first one, circumcision. You kind of know when you obeyed it or not. You either have it's not rocket science, it's not a mystery, okay? But the Sabbath, okay? No working? What does that mean, right? What defines work? What constitutes work? Because it was so vague, the Pharisees felt like they had to make rules for the rule of Sabbath, and it was kind of like a safety bubble around the Sabbath that made sure it was impossible to ever break. It's kind of like this. Our sanctuary, okay? You might not know this, but we have a rule of no drinks in here other than water, and the rule is there to prevent spills and stains and stuff, okay? But let's say, okay, to ensure that happens, us pastors come together and we make an extra rule. No water as well, just in case people are sneaking non-water drinks into their mugs and water bottles. I see you guys, I sit behind you, you're just lucky I don't care, okay? But who knows, okay? What if someone puts coffee in their mouth before they enter the sanctuary, step in, and then it accidentally spills out, then it'll stain the carpet? Okay, one more rule. No eating and drinking 2 hours before service. But if you think about it, us humans, we're just like a body bag of stainable liquids, okay? We can spit, we can pee, we can get cut and stain the carpet. Last rule, I promise. Every human being meets downstairs for service where you can't stain the carpet. You hear that, and you're like, that is the dumbest thing ever, and yet that is not far from what the Pharisees did. They created a sacred rule book that defines work into 39 different classes, or in other words, a bunch of things you can't do on the Sabbath. So you have things like you can't harvest, you can't hunt, you can't butcher. That makes sense. That's real, actual work, okay? But then you read on and you see things like you can't tie knots. You can't stitch things. You can't knit things. Sorry to all the girls here. You can't climb a tree in case you break a branch, and that's kind of like harvesting something. And then it gets super specific as well, okay? So for example, if a roof falls on you, you can't repair it, and if someone is stuck under the debris, you can lift the minimal amount of debris to get them out, and after that, you have to stop. Crazy, okay, crazy. Think about it. The Sabbath. What's the Sabbath made for? The Sabbath was made to lift our burdens, give us rest, but what did the Pharisees turn it into? A heavy burden. Like a dictator, you kind of have to tippy-toe around all the time, right? This safety bubble is why the Pharisees were so mad at the disciples for picking grain. Now again, I don't want to just overgeneralize Pharisees as these evil, demonic entities trying to stop the advancement of the kingdom. If anything, many of them were the most devoted to the kingdom of God. But they completely misinterpreted, misprioritized, misread the purpose of God's law. And because of that, they slowly became destroyers of the kingdom instead of builders of the kingdom. Because they have read and used the rules wrongly, the rules have become weapons. This isn't just a them issue, it's an us issue. Okay, because the truth is, most of the time, if we point our gaze towards ourselves, you'll see something resembling a Pharisee. And it doesn't take much. Jesus compares the hypocrisy of a Pharisee to yeast, okay? If anyone bakes here, you know what yeast does. You put a little tiny bit in, and it expands, and it multiplies. Where do you see this the most? Where is this the most prevalent? Churches. Churches, right? The body of Jesus. The glimpse of God's kingdom where you're supposed to see right relationships and forgiveness, healing, grace, mercy, all of that. A place like that, shunning and cutting people out for not fitting into their mold of what a good Christian should look like. What is their main cutting tool? Rules. Right? Now, if other churches are like that, what makes it that we as LCC are not like that? Perhaps we are. Here are 3 markers of a Pharisee. There are definitely like a lot more, but I think these evade us the most, okay? So 1, you like rules a lot, so you should marry it, okay? You see yourself as the keeper of right and wrong. You get to define it for other people, like the Pharisees did with the disciples for picking grain, right? And you follow these rules really, really, really well, but you find no life in it, no joy, no love. As one commentator said, you'll be like, can you go to the next slide? You're like an ill-taught piano student who plays all the right notes but fails to make music. Like an actor in a B movie who woodenly recites a memorized script but does not carry any conviction. Or like a dancer who carefully counts the steps but never cuts loose to dance. Sucks. Number 2, okay, you see ugly more than beauty, right? You see the bad and ugly way more than the beauty, and as a result, you criticize way more generously than you compliment, okay? In the second part of a story, we might come across the dumbest verse in the Bible. Let's read it. Mark 3:2. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. What the heck? Like, they were trying to catch Jesus, or they're trying to see, like, is he going to supernaturally, miraculously, in a godly way, heal this broken man? Right? That's crazy. That's like, no offense, but hot girlfriend crazy, okay? It's like, hey, Jesus, I caught you levitating and controlling the weather and reconstructing matter on the Sabbath. You are godless, you're a pagan, I can't believe you would break the rules. Why not just bow down and worship him at that point? He's God, right? Because this is the heart posture of a Pharisee. To see only the ugly and not the beauty. To constantly judge and hate instead of celebrate and enjoy God's work in his hand in all things. Lastly, number 3, you try to fit everyone into an expectation mold of who they should be instead of accepting the reality of who they are and then meeting them there and then going from there, okay? And the effect of that is that you care about the issues of their sin, the issues of their lifestyle, more than the person themselves. Spoiler, that's not love. That's not even close to what love is, okay? If you catch yourself resonating with any of these, be careful, because at the end of our story, we see the Pharisees teaming up with the Herodians, who are like the Pharisees' mortal enemies in order to kill Jesus. It's kind of like one of those, like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. That is where the Pharisee spirit leads us. Death. Okay? It kills. It drives people away from Jesus, the source of life, his joy, his love, healing, peace, all of that. It kills it. Now, this list of markers is not just some impersonal list. It's not just what we see in our Bible passage, though it's there. This is me. This is me, okay? I catch myself loving rules. I use them as weapons to exclude. I shame people into good behavior. I see the bad and ugly way more than the beauty. I criticize more than I compliment, at least in my head. And I'm constantly disappointed. People don't fit in my expectation molds because I care about the issue a lot of times more than the person. Hi, I'm Tim. And I'm your textbook example of Pharisee. Except I know less Bible and I suck at my disciplines. But if you find yourself where I often am, I'm sorry. It's lifeless. It's terrible. It's a miserable place to be, but I have some tools. Something that has been ultra useful for me, especially against the prideful spirit of like, hey, look at me, I'm doing this all myself, is doubling down on the grace of Jesus. What does that look like? When I feel that deep sense that I'm not enough, instead of trying to make up for it or cover it, I say, wait, I know that. I know I'm not enough. I know I'm a sinner. And all I have is simply grace from Jesus, which is a gift, but it's a gift better than, I didn't earn it, but it's a gift better than anything I could ever earn. From there, when I find myself judging other people, thinking, man, what a wreck, so misguided and lost, I say, wait, I know that, okay? Just like me, they're a sinner. Just like me, they need Jesus as well. See, the solution to our tendency to judge and criticize problems isn't for us to become condemners or saviors even. It's to bring the problem or the person to the feet of Jesus saying, we need you. We're nothing without you. We can't do this without you. And then from there, if he ends up using us as part of the solution to the problem, great, praise God, but bring them to Jesus first, especially in prayer. And as you practice this more and more, you won't just become the most grateful people ever, you'll become the most gracious people ever, free to give, because you know we've been given so much. It's in this space, okay? You'll interact with the rules much differently, because you'll come to realize rules used rightly are gifts, which is our second point. Okay, another dad story, because, like Father's Day. So I told you, Chris and I bought our kids a kitchen playset instead of monster trucks. Why? I'll give you the lore. I'll give you the story behind it. As a father of three, my deepest desire for my boys, other than, knowing God and loving Him and becoming like Jesus and being filled with the Spirit, other than all that stuff, okay, is for them to become the most manly men ever. Okay, like those guys thrown in the woods, and they can build their house by cutting down wood or whatever. They can make their own food by hunting and starting fires, all while shirtless and buff for some reason, right? Essentially, I want them to be what I'll never be. Okay, so to that goal, about a year ago, Christine and I got them a construction playset. Okay, hammers, drills, screwdrivers, nails, all of that. They were going to become men by the age of 2. That was what's going to happen. Every day, I'd have a black coffee in the morning. And so one day, Josiah and Micah came up to me and asked, Daddy, do you want coffee? And I'm like, sure, not thinking much of it. They scurried off. 2 seconds later, they come back with this thing, okay? Yeah, that thing. Okay, so it's like a toy bolt through a nut and a nail sticking out. And they're like, here you go, here's your coffee. You have to drink the straw, okay? And I'm like, I'm looking at this thing so conflicted because I'm like, so cute. And at the same time, I'm like, you violated that manly construction set and turned it into a kitchen. How could you? The kitchen is only meant for modern men, right? What are you thinking? I don't know. Okay, it's 2024. But I thought of Neb. He cooks for our church a lot, and he is just so manly that we got him a kitchen set anyways, okay? Now, here's a question. Now, that depends on the intent of why I bought them the construction set. If it's only for them to learn handyman skills and become a man, they missed the point, okay? But if it was for them to enjoy and be creative and work together, play together, we hit the mark. And with all jokes aside, the second matters way more to us. So even though it wasn't used exactly as it was supposed to, the intent was achieved. See, God's rules are a gift. Okay, something not to take life away, but to create and sustain and give life instead, even when it's not followed to the exact detail. This is the point Jesus makes in his response to the Pharisees when they accused the disciples. Let's read what he says. He answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? In the days of Abiathar the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for men, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath." I'm going to be honest with you, okay? This reference to King David Jesus makes stumped me for days, okay? Because it didn't seem like a good argument. It doesn't bring up the Sabbath. It's a very obscure story. A much more logical debate tactic would have been to bring up the Sabbath in Exodus and say, hey, we're not breaking God's real rules. We're just breaking your safety bubble rules, right? And those don't matter to me. Jesus doesn't go that route. And I think if you dig a little bit deeper in what he's doing, you'll find that he is a genius. Okay, he's a genius. So he brings up this story about King David while he wasn't king yet, but he was anointed as king. Okay? And as David and his companions were like running away from King Saul and they were hungry, they went to the house of God, asked for food. They didn't have food. They only had this bread that only priests were supposed to eat. David and his companions ate that. Okay? But then, Jesus makes it clear. They broke the law. Hi. Okay. Jesus makes it clear that they broke the law. It was unlawful. What is going on here? I think Jesus is doing at least 3 really masterful things here, okay? First, he's showing that the intent of the rule, the why behind the rule, matters more than the word of the rule, okay? 2, he's exposing the hypocrisy of the Pharisees, okay? So King David, the Pharisees' heroes, breaks the actual law of God. They don't bat an eye, okay? Jesus and his disciples break their version of like safety bubble law, and they're making a huge deal out of it. They're hypocrites. 3, and this is my favorite one maybe, I believe Jesus is inviting us to think deeply about who he is. At that time, all the Jews were waiting for the Messiah, the descendant of David, the anointed king and savior of the Jews that was going to make Israel great again. Okay, make Israel great again. Miga. Just imagine them just wearing a bunch of like those Miga hats, okay? Just as great as when King David ruled. By quoting 1 Samuel 21, Jesus puts himself and his disciples in the place of David and his companions, right? Jesus as David, the anointed king that was not yet enthroned. He's hinting that he is the Messiah king they were waiting for. Cool, right? Isn't that cool? Anyone else excited about that? Okay, no, yeah? Okay, Jesus is smart or something. Now, because of time restraints, we can't expand on all of these, and so we're just going to zone in on the first one, the intent of the rule over the word of the rule. What Jesus shows with this David reference is that David can break the law and still be considered blameless and right. Because in 1 Kings 15:5, it reads this, "For David had done what was right in the eyes of the Lord and had not failed to keep any of the Lord's commands all the days of his life, except in the case of Uriah the Hittite," which is the story of Bathsheba, right? David didn't do wrong by eating the bread, and what this shows is that the law was never the point. The law was never the point. There is a principle behind the law that rises above the law that tells us when it's okay to break the rules. Now, I'm hesitant to say this because if you're anything like me, you'll take this as permission to be like, I don't need to read the Bible anymore. I'm going to do whatever I want now. No. If anything, the principle behind the law and rules holds you to a higher standard than what the rules even say. We see this with Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount, right? When he's like, murdering isn't just about killing. You violate that commandment when you hate. Or committing adultery isn't about having sex outside marriage. You violate that when you have lust in your mind. That is a much higher standard. What are the principles behind the laws? The principle behind the rules are love and justice, mercy, kindness, self-control, and all of these things that the rules simply try to convey. When the greatest thing we can do out of love is to break some rules, that is when it's time to break some rules. Really lazy illustration, I'm sorry, but think about Nazi Germany, okay? When the Nazis were knocking on the doors of those hiding Jews, and they're like, hey, are there Jews here? Could lying, aka could breaking the 9th commandment of bearing false witness, could that be a good thing to do? Yes, it actually becomes the only right thing to do. See, the rules were made for us. It's a gift, it's not a death sentence. At the center of our passage, we see this line here. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Hypothetical scenario, okay? How silly would it be if before the creation of the world, triune God, right, said to himself, oh man, we have a dilemma. We have all these rules, but we have no one to follow them. Oh, I know, or we know, let's create humans and stuff so that they can follow these rules. That is dumb. And yet we live as if that is what the rules were made for, right? We were made for the rules. But what if the rules were made for us, for our benefit? What if sin isn't bad because it's forbidden, but it's forbidden because it's bad for us? What if God cared about our thriving more than anyone else? That's why he gave us the wisdom of the Bible. These what ifs aren't what ifs for me. It's reality. Our Maker knows us best and has what is best in store for us. And so as we engage with the Bible and we come across rules for life, engage with it in such a way where you're more focused on the intent and the principles of the rule over the actual words, and then train to see all of life through that. How though? There's an idea in the business world by Dr. W.E. Deming that states, every system is perfectly designed to get the result that it does. Okay? That means we can tell the intent of our lives and how we set up our lives looking at the results of it. Okay, why do I bring this up? I bring this up because I want to be honest to our human experience. We're not some robots where we can just enter a code and a prompt that says, love God and be like Jesus, and then we automatically become that. It's so much more complicated. We don't even know what that looks like. We don't know what the measure for success is for that. We just kind of copy what other people are doing. It's kind of like this. Example, if I say I want to get healthy, but I don't know what that means, and I assume healthy is when the number on the scale goes down because everyone else is skinnier than me, I will design my life to make sure that number goes down, and it will go down. But it will get to the point where I'm like not drinking water. I'm starving as long as I can. I'm like taking off my clothes when I step on the scale. I'm shaving my hair as often as I can because, weight, right? Anyone on the outside would look in and be like, oh, dude, that's really not healthy. And I will be completely oblivious to it. Body is not doing well, and now I have an eating disorder, right? I think this is what happened with the Pharisees. They said, we want to be devoted to God. And as they focused on God's rules over his character, the system they created was perfectly designed to get people behaving correctly, but out of fear and shame, not love. As a consequence, people are suffering because the rules have become weapons. The rules have become slave masters. But if the Pharisees just examined the results, they would have seen that something was so off with the whole loving God, loving neighbor, plot line, goal thing, if they were using God's life-giving rules as a way to kill someone, Jesus, for doing good. Looking at the results and fruit of your life will show you what your system is designed for. Are you in and out of a bunch of unstable romantic relationships? Are your friendships always crashing and burning and you feel like you are the cause? Are you autopilot all the time? Are you unsatisfied? Thinking you are 10 notches better than everyone else and everyone else should be like you. If that is the case, it's likely that over the years, you have set up your system, your life system, to perfectly get those results. Here's a question to take home. What is the system you're using perfectly designed for? What is the system you're using perfectly designed for? And what results and fruit would you want to aim for? Because you got to think about it, right? What does a life look like? What does it look like? What does success look like if we're following God's intent for life? A compelling answer is a life that looks like Jesus' life. Okay, now I know we look at the Gospels and we see Jesus live his life and we don't envy it. He kind of gives like homeless vibes, right? But that is actually our model example of abundant life. Continuous connection to God, perfectly content, embodying self-giving love, having compassion to see the suffering, resisting injustice, creating peace, redeeming brokenness. Those are great results. Those are great metrics to design your system for. And if we want that life, we don't stop at just following his commands. We also follow his lifestyle, okay? His rule of life. As he practices Sabbath and prayer and community, hospitality, minimalism, all of that, we also practice that. But here's the kicker. Even though we know all this, it's still hard to follow these rules and not end up a Pharisee, okay? So here's the thing, okay? Jesus is not simply a role model. He's not simply a role model. He's so much more than that, because we see in our passage, as we grow in the love and knowledge of God, you realize it becomes less about God's rules and more about God's rule. Okay, less about God's rules and more about his rule over us, his rule over the world. We read in our passage here, Jesus is Lord of even the Sabbath. What does that mean? Jesus is Lord of everything, even the Sabbath. And it's under that lordship and that rule of Jesus that we find abundant life, not just for ourselves, but for the world. Who would have thunk that abundant life is attained not primarily by striving under rules, but by surrendering our rule to His. Me, just a second ago, okay? Today, we talked about how God's rules lead us to an abundant life. And it's not by using them as burdensome weapons, it's using them as life-giving gifts. And for both points, we look to Jesus, okay? First, we can never become prideful or judgy for what we have, what we achieved, what other people have achieved, because it's been given to us. It's been given to them. We didn't earn it. We can't boast about it, right? Second, we looked at Jesus' good rule and reign, knowing from the intent of His rules, from the principles behind it, that He has the best in store for all humanity, the best vision for life, and so trusting that we follow that proudly, joyfully, and faithfully.